So joining us now is Pane Andov. Pane he's one of the most invested UFO researchers I've personally come across. He is so dedicated to all things paranormal, everything from astral projection to ETs, dimensional beings, UFOs, the unexplained, and he's really given a lot of his life and a lot of his time and energy to this field. So we're really blessed to have someone of Pane's calibre on the Gold Coast here. Pane's actually a resident of the Gold Coast, and you can see the investment and the care and the detail and the passion that he has in the books that he's written. He just told me he's written 11 books, and they really are works of art. The photography and the information, the research that's gone into those books is quite exceptional, and anyone can only emulate to try to write one book with that much depth, clarity and that much understanding of this phenomenon. And he's always wanting to speak for as long as possible at Paradigm Shift. We have a bit of an arm wrestle every time of how long he's going to have. He's got the longest presentation of anybody today, and really enjoy it because it's not just the presentation of the kind of the greatest hits or something like that of what's happening in the latest in the UFO ET phenomenon, but it's been really considered, documented research, and he's crossed the I's, dotted the T's, and really gone into things in detail, and you can really start to appreciate that it's not just a passing interest or a hobby, it's something that, you know, he himself really wants answers to, like I'm sure the rest of us do, and we know that we're still only scratching the surface of what this phenomenon, what this reality really is in regard to this whole spectrum of consciousness that's just teeming in this universe and beyond. And he's really going to share his insights today, and buckle up because we're going to go in deep everywhere, and it's going to be coming pretty fast and furious. So please make welcome Pane Andov.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it. Cheers. Thank you very much, Anthony. Well appreciate. It's really great to be back here after 2 years. Just give me a sec to put just small formality. Yeah, how you guys doing? Good. That's good. Beautiful energy. So, just give me a sec to set a few things up. All right, today talks of mine is called Past to Present, Ancient Civilizations and Why Extraterrestrials Are Here on Earth Today. So as every talk of mine is just information purposes only and my personal understanding of the reality that we are living. So it's going to be kind of like a serious attempt to recreate the forgotten ancient past and how the extraterrestrials were involved in those times, if you will. So the logical question is where to start. Probably from the beginning, right? What is life? What's the meaning of life? What's this universe, you know? Where did we come from? You know, what are we doing here? Where are we going? Where everything around us is going? Logical questions that bothers everyone, if you will. And I try entire my life to find some of the answers. So here we are in 2020. We have progressed technologically to a certain degree and spiritually, if you will, but still in general we are a species with amnesia, if you will. And we really don't understand what took place on planet Earth thousands of years ago and how things progressed to the stage that they are now. Obviously we are not alone in the universe, and we are just one species of so many out there. As probably some of you know, I'm also a contactee from a very early age, and some of the information that will be passed to you in parallel with my own research is directly originating from the extraterrestrial source, either through direct astral contact, through telepathic holographic transmissions, if you will, or through the fifth system, which is described in my books, which is a meditative protocol that a person can tune in and establish communications with extraterrestrial intelligence and actually receives or sends data, if you will. So in a sense, I've been given a gift in many subjects, and it's time for me to share that with the people. So whatever people do with this information is their own choice. As I mentioned, please take it only as my own personal understanding and view of the reality. As previously mentioned, there are so many things that are happening that we are not aware that took place in our ancient past. Practically we've forgotten our ancient past and how the extraterrestrials were involved in those times, of planet Earth, if you will. And obviously we are neither the first nor the most advanced civilization that ever existed on planet Earth. According to what I was shown and I was given by the extraterrestrial sources, there were two major conflicts that appeared in our Earth history, if you will. One was a bit bigger, if you will, a major on the interplanetary scale, on the solar system scale, that occurred almost 12,000 years ago, or to be more accurate, 11,600 years ago, while the other one, that's actually the conflict where the Lemuria and Atlantis were destroyed, and the other one was more recent, around 4,000 years ago, which Mahabharata and Ramayana talk about, which downgraded the genetic functionality of the biology of life, if you will. From that time onwards, in my understanding, planet Earth is completely under surveillance 24/7 from different extraterrestrial species for different purposes, which I will explain during the presentation. So please buckle up, so to speak, as Anthony is saying. It's going to be a lot of information, a lot of content. So we will start with the basics. So from what we understand, the universe is a pretty big place, right? So 93 billion light years. And in contrast, what the mainstream academia is pushing, the universe is teeming with life, if you will. There are many planets and moonlets that are habitable. And if the translations from the ancient Indian Puranas are correct, in those days they were referring that there are at least 400,000 humanoid species in the observable universe, if you will, and these are here are not included the subspecies. And many of those species have surpassed our technological understanding, if you will, and they're found different ways to travel through the vastness of the universe. And the first species, as far as I was explained, they established something which is called a cosmic metro system, which connects the stars, the black holes, and other punctuation points, if you will, for a faster traveling. In other words, supermassive black holes and the stars are actually traversable wormholes. There sometimes you can even pass 20 light years in just one nanosecond. It's just traveling so much faster than conventional spacecraft travel that we are exploring nowadays. The same stuff is observed heavily around the sun, if you will. Type 2 civilization crafts, mostly cigar shape, that are literally entering this cosmic metro system, and sometimes eventual occasion visitation of type 3. And as I mentioned, through this wormhole system, the traveling is just so much efficient and so much faster. So 20 light years in 1 nanosecond, that's a lot of distance to cross. And obviously, I'm also against the mainstream archaeology and also the science that life appears randomly out of the blue. In my understanding, all the life in the universe that we are seeing is cosmically engineered, if you will. The superior species that are here for billions of years, they have the capability of cosmic engineering, modifying planets, atmospheres, temperatures, surface topography, ecology, ecosystem, and you name it. In other words, to terraform rocky planets or moonlets, from absolutely lifeless environment to fully biological compatible living zone. So in short, what conditions must the planet have to support life as we know it? So extended regions of liquid water, conditions favorable for the assembly of the complex organic molecules, and energy sources to sustain metabolism. And the 6 most common elements needed to support human life are, of course, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. And this is only just for the human existence. It doesn't necessarily apply for the species that have triple DNA or quadruple DNA and different how should I put it, biophysical makeup. Obviously, those cosmic engineers, if you will, that are spreading life around the cosmos, they need to know the fundamental programming language of life, which is biology. And biology by itself, it's a self-assembling nanotechnology which a built-in programming language. And of course, they have to know how to code RNA and DNA. In other words, from creating a simple organisms, cells, to more complex organisms, and eventually combining of biological with a synthetic, or eventually even controlling, the biological and synthetic by the artificial intelligence, or even implanting a consciousness or awareness to the plasma host, if you will, something which I will explain shortly. So the accepted planetary evolution model by the World Academia is that the planet Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago. when our solar system settled into a current layout, which I don't have any issues with. But then they're claiming that approximately 230 million years ago the dinosaurs appeared, supposedly evolved from the reptiles, and they got extinct around 65 million years ago, and anatomically modern humans appeared around 200,000 years ago. So if this is the case, if the dinosaur went extinct about 65 million years ago, and the anatomically modern humans appeared only 200,000 years ago, then how can this be? The fossil record on many places which has been discovered and heavily, how should I put it, suppressed by the Smithsonian Institute and the world academia, if you will, show existence of the ancient humanoids that have bigger sizes in parallel with the dinosaurs, if you will. So, as you can see, those ancient humanoids were far more bigger in size than we are today. And this comes from the deep in jungles in Cambodia. And it's clearly, showing the Stegosaurus dinosaurs, which, according to the mainstream archaeology, existed somewhere between 163 and 100 million years ago. So how is that possible if those ancient people in Cambodia, if you will, were only a few thousand years, old? They know exactly how this dinosaur looked like. It doesn't make any sense. So the fossil record do not show millions of years of evolution, and like many things which are suppressed nowadays by the mainstream archaeology and the Smithsonian Institute, if you will, it's completely, how should I put it, controlled. Obviously, there was a downgrade of the biological functionality in the ancient past, more accurately around 4,000 years ago, where the ancient humanoids were literally downgraded into what we are today. And it's not just us. They have downgraded the entire quality of life, or the optimal genetic expression, the best of the RNA and DNA the organism can provide. So the trees doesn't grow that tall anymore. The sea life have shrinked. The dinosaurs, the animals, the insects lost their sizes. The birds lost their sizes. And even the ancient humanoids, which were different from us, they had the elongated skulls, more arms, spike growing from the top, longer ears, etc. They have actually turned it into what we are today. So some powerful people want to erase our history, if you will. This is not a secret anymore. Obviously, unfortunately, there is a deep state, which is controlling things, and the Smithsonian Institute, which was established August 10, 1846, is practically responsible for the biggest deliberate cover-up of the human ancient history, not just from finding of the remains of the ancient giants, and also literally debunking and blocking the information that was recorded in New York Times, during the 1800s and early 1900s about those ancient humanoids. And also with the Photoshop, context online, they're trying to debunk any serious effort for documented evidence of those giants that existed. The theory of the evolution, as the Charles Darwin, put it, is absolutely doesn't hold any water. He was also a Freemason, unfortunately, and was heavily chaotic personality. Just the Vatican itself holds over 50 miles of ancient documents which are hidden from the public, and they speak of completely different history from what we've been told in churches, in the scientific institutions, etc. Unfortunately, the Freemasons had infiltrated in all aspects of life, from the governments to religious institutions, which are all just their extended hands, if you will, supposedly for the greater good, but unfortunately on the top levels, it's rotten as rotten can be. It's just controlling the human population. And they're involved with dark occult, if you will, child trafficking and so many different things. In other words, what they're trying to accomplish is to build a new society, a new Atlantis on the principles of the old destroyed Atlantis, something which I will explain in a second. And as Anthony is eloquently putting, but there is also other element of us, a percentage of humanity is waking up, it's opening up, is changing the vibration, is just seeing things through love and heart. That's the frequency that we need to focus, if you will. If we want to just free ourselves, if you will, and change the environment that we are living. So the primary function of the universe, as far as I was told, is that at the beginning of the time there was a gigantic super consciousness, or the source consciousness, that spread around the 7 levels or the 7 planes of the existence that exist in this universe, and designed and created all this. Once that was happening, it spread the spark of life everywhere around this universe, and withdrawn from the scene, just left things to grow up, from sit and take their own course, if you will. So it created two forces, the forces of light and darkness, which vibrationally they both look completely different, if you will, and one force pushes towards the evolution while the other one pushes against the evolution. So the entire universe is practically a gigantic cosmic womb to deliver a new cosmic superconsciousness. How far out it sounds, that's exactly what is happening. And it's serving as an evolutionary catalyst, a school that conscious living forms would learn, mature, evolve through a variety of cosmic experiences, you know. So in the final stage of evolution, each species becomes one single conscious, you know, entity and bonds with this cosmic superconsciousness, which is probably by now a sum of millions of other species that have evolved in the universe. And they have discovered the power of the force or the psionic powers long time before we came to the cosmic scene, in my understanding. Some are utilizing those powers for good, while the other ones were using those powers for selfish and destructive purposes. Unfortunately, what we are seeing in our solar system, and especially on Earth, we have that kind of species that are present, which are abducting people without their consent, implanting them with alien implants, you know, genetic programs and all sorts kind of things. So it's a path that leads to self-destruction, if you will. But nevertheless, in most of the cases, the species are starting to evolve when the little ones or the offspring start to change. They become more telepathic, more telekinetic, and in time they start to bond more with the force, if you will. They start to experience materialization, teleportation, then eventually they start to exercise something which, unfortunately nowadays, is limitedly known through astral projection, where the consciousness departs the physical host. And then after hundreds and thousands and millions of those, you know, individual sparks, if you will, come together, they create one single consciousness, far more powerful together, that can never be apart. And this is just the beginning of the transition from the material to the immaterial. In other words, the ultimate goal of each species regarding the evolution is to free from the bondage of the material existence once when it assimilates all the experiences. This is a process that could last from only a few thousand years to over 1,000 years, you know, depending on the species and other factors which are at play. The reason why I'm actually even going in this direction is because in the ancient past, as far as I was explained, the Lemurians were as closest to what was just described. So the ancient Rama Empire, the Khmer Empire, which actually focused mostly around the Cambodia and Thailand region, are practically the humanoid descendants of the original colony of Lemuria, the same principle and way of life. You know, they fully understood the power of the consciousness, their multidimensional presence and the energy. They were literally capable of tuning into meditative oneness, that they were sharing their feelings, emotions, you know, thoughts, energy, and so on and so forth. They were able to unite their energy, and as I will explain in a minute, they were ready to jump, you know, for the next stage of the evolution. That's why the dark side of the force started to send their emissaries, if you will, in order to prevent the process. So those huge plasmoids are detected around the moon and the solar system, which are still there. Nevertheless, just in a nutshell, there was like a huge conflict that resulted around 11,600 years ago that prevented this fusing process of the ancient Lemurians. So let's just start with the forgotten ancient history. So I will go step by step, and then as I will reach a certain step, I will change the PowerPoint presentation into PDF, which will provide me the opportunity to share four pictures or 4 slides, you know, in the same screen, which will speed up, you know, the process and understanding. So the Lemuria, the oldest civilization on Earth, practically what we are talking is about extraterrestrial colonization of the solar system. So to the best of my knowledge, between 70,000 years ago and 50,000 years ago, the first colonizers started to appear in this part of the space, of the cosmos, if you will, through the cosmic metro system that I mentioned before. They arrived in this solar system, and they were looking for different moonlets or planets that they can actually inhabit. They literally inhabited the planet that was once orbiting between Mars and Jupiter, Mars, and also planet Earth. It practically, from the lifeless, you know, environment, they provided all the necessary conditions for the biological life. In other words, completely against, what the mainstream archaeology is pushing, that the life had evolved from the amoeba, and then more complex organisms. The life was practically brought here fully established, a fully established technological and spiritual civilization. So those first colonizators, if you will, were called Lemurians, and they built up tremendously high and beautiful cities on the surface, but they also, drilled the planet and established the world, which by the legends is known as Agartha. So in the ancient Buddhist traditions, they were called the Arhats, or the enlightened ones. They were the supernatural beings, knowledges of the supreme truth, untouched by evil, if you will. They had the insight into the true nature of the existence and full access to the power of the universal cosmic force. And this vast subterranean world was illuminated by the inner source of light, which was a huge plasma, shining ball, if you will, which provided the heat and the light necessary for the biological existence, a perfect mix between the spiritual and the technological aspect. So the Agartha was governed by the so-called king of the world, or Brahmatma, which is also known as Maitreya, Sanat Kumara in other traditions. But in basic, this being was so powerful that was universal legislator, mediator between the ancient humanoids and divinity. In other words, what I was referring before as a cosmic superconsciousness, which is highly intelligent, highly divine, if you will, this being was able to literally communicate like we are communicating between us. And he was assisted by two holy figures, if you will, Mahatma, that actually predicted things at the time, and Mahanga, that makes them true. So the language spoken in this land was Vatanan, which was a sacred language that was precursor to what today we refer as the ancient Sanskrit. And the capital of the kingdom was known as Shambhala, and which literal translation from the Sanskrit language, it's White Island, which existed on a beautiful sea that once existed in Gobi Desert region, which is nowadays. So they had kilometers tall buildings, roads that levitated in air, vimanas, super advanced technological flying crafts of various sizes and purposes that were capable of moving extremely fast without making any sound. It was magnificence in motion, if you will. The main source of the power was plasma energy, and under the capital would flow rivers of energy whose beneficial fluids could reach the ancient Lemurian citizens in all of the Agarthian cities of the vast planetary underground network. So the technology was just simply amazing. They were utilizing artificial intelligence that we are starting to understand, at least to some small degree nowadays, which was programmed and designed on a divine and moral principles. In other words, everything was controlled through thoughts, emotions, or vocal command, literally from the vimanas to just simple things like opening and closing the doors, etc. So these were the times when the earth was flourishing with abundance of love, harmony, and peaceful coexistence, if you will, the best of both worlds. What this can actually do as much as possible, if you will. So this is also very important to understand. Their anti-gravitational interstellar spaceships, as far as I was told, had a propulsion based on a system analogous to that of Laghima. I don't know if you have heard that term before or not, but it's a supernatural power which is attained through a spiritual practice known as Siddhi. So this supernatural power of consciousness, once when properly awakened and cultivated, gave the ancient Lemurians a centrifugal force strong enough to counteract the old gravitational pull, if you will. It is the same Laghima which enabled them to physically levitate in Padmasana or other positions. They also had the knowledge of mantrika, which is the science of sound, if you will, which produce vibration that cannot just alter the matter, but also the fabric of space-time continuum. And it was really amazing. Tibetan lamas for thousands of years have kept certain knowledge about this kingdom and what actually did. So the entire myth about the Buddha and the belief system, it's a bit limited in my understanding. What we are dealing here is practically a whole race of the ancient Buddhas, if you will, humanoids that were able to literally levitate, communicate telepathically, etc. So all those circled areas that are shown on the screen are practically areas where you can find Asian Buddhistic temples or eventually statues, from that time. So this is a snapshot from the Dambulla temple in Sri Lanka, if you will. As far as I was explained through holographic visuals, and explanations, this is one of the formal universe of the ancient Lemurians, and if you start to look around and research around the world, you will find practically the same outfit. So they had different genetics. They had the longer ears than us. The hair style was different. There was a spike that was growing from the top of their head because of different genetics that they were utilizing to literally communicate telepathically between each other, just like antenna, if you will. They were focusing chi energy from it, you know, and there's so many other things. They were exactly powerful enough to understand, you know, which posture of the body, or which madra, or eventually voice mantra is producing certain effects to the body or in the consciousness. They were also utilizing those devices that is clearly seen in Borobudur in Java, which is not a temple at all, but we are talking about a device which can literally penetrate into the interdimensional energy and bring it to this plane of existence, if you will. And they had a bigger body sizes. And also those sitting platforms for meditation, if you will, that's where the energy was coming through it. They were charging the energy, and the female energy sometimes was charged through those standing platforms, which are clearly visible on the top left image, where the females were practically standing and charging with the energy. And as you can see on the bottom middle picture, where it's a very, very rare picture from the Khmer Empire, if you will. It's showing the pagoda literally like a surround by the energy bubble. So in practically, they were utilizing those devices like a Tesla transformers to acquire the prana energy directly into the meditative spot. In other words, they were not eating, they were not drinking. They were living for thousands of years. There was no disease, no death, you know, they practically were immortal, so to speak. It's just amazing what those Asians were able to do. And the young ones, before they were introduced into the force and into the wisdom of the universe, they didn't have that spike, you know, but once when they activate what today we call, you know, again with the limited understanding, Kundalini energy, this spike was able to be actually grown. And from what I was explained, they were able to retract, you know, withdraw this spike in and out, if you will, in different circumstances. In other words, they had the full knowledge of the force. Those magnetic devices here shown on the top of their head is again through what is limitedly known as astral projection. They were able to magnetically suck the awareness of the individual and combine the consciousness into oneness, and not just combining the energy, but they were also able to travel to different parts of the universe and also different dimensions by becoming one single conscious entity, if you will. So the pyramids in China are very interesting, because this is a snapshot from Jalzemer temple in India, which is very significant. It doesn't mean much for people that don't understand what they're looking at. But from what I was explaining, you know, those Asians were able to tune into meditative oneness, and they started a meditative chant, you know, pronouncing certain vocal vibration that by also utilizing a mental force, they were amplified by those like a bells. And when those bells were ringing, they practically were generating plasma energy. And then that plasma energy was further collected in this capacitor, if you will. So when the Vimana literally landed on this like a platforms, if you will, it was charged with different fuel. Other words, there is absolutely no indications that they were using, you know, anti-gravity, you know, elements above 115 or so. What the Bob Lazar was saying, they were utilizing a pure force of the universe, which once when it's activated, it can go on almost forever, so to speak. The Asians were combinations of also between animals, or what we actually believe to be, you know, animals nowadays, you know, between the Asian humanoids and snakes or the Nagas. More arms, more legs. They knew exactly, you know, what the energy does, you know, those electromagnetic devices on the top of their head and that kind of stuff. Just to summarize this part, they had the full knowledge into vibration, into energy, into consciousness, into multidimensional presence, if you will. They were so advanced in this area, so which means we have not came to be as the slaves in minds, as the people are saying, Anunnaki and so on and so forth. This doesn't support the evidence which is provided by Zachariah Sitchin, you know, Enki and Hancock, you know, and that kind of stuff. Anyway, the Lemurians were almost ready for the final step of their evolution. The dark side of the force, as far as I will explain, sensed that it's dead and started sending its dark workers to prevent this from happening, since as every new species evolves, the light becomes stronger, if you will. So around 25,000 years ago, the newcomers started arriving. They started pouring into the solar system for the next 5,000 years, but mostly into the area which was a colony that was established and was given a name Atlantis. And this colony Atlantis had its peak around 15,000 years ago. The genetics of these newcomers was different. Some of the species that were arriving in contrast with the Asian Lemurians that had different, hair, long ears, the spike that was growing, they were bold, the elongated skulls, and different intellect, but their culture was also different, So they lived on a principle that superior species with certain bloodlines have a natural right to rule above the other species. Instead of equality for all, they preferred the rule of the stronger and more powerful one. So those people think that they're mythological, but practically they existed. They were mixed, with artificial intelligence, technologies, and many other things that were utilized in those days. Nothing that we are seeing today is new. It's been discovered, and it's all around the universe and in far more progressive stages. They were also utilizing the dark side of the flower of life, auric field, which also can be used, both for good and evil. And this is very, very powerful force that they were utilizing. At the time, Lemurians started to withdraw from the areas where the colonizators, were coming, as far as I was explained by the extraterrestrials. But as more and more they were coming, it was very harder. Using diplomacy at first and then other things, as a technological manipulation, they started to influence all the citizens of the solar system, and especially the leaders of the Atlantis, promising that they will actually survive, going further and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, they were destroyed just the same, tricked and double played, if you will. So the energy was very bad. In comparison with the Asian Lemurians, the Asian Egyptian culture, which are descendants from the Atlanteans, if you will, they were completely different living organisms, if you will. They explore the negativity, the brutality towards the animal kingdom, to each other. You can see the stuff. And also, like with the Asian Lemurians, they had the different body sizes, and some were really, really big creatures. We are talking about over 20 meters creatures, if you will. So, especially this is in Karnak, it's an interesting snapshot which is showing, that being. And the reason why those structures were built so tall, and those stairs. For example, a normal sized human can't walk on those stairs. They're just simply too gigantic for that humanoid, because they were designed for humanoids that were far bigger and taller in size, if you will. That's exactly why we are seeing what we are seeing, and just our belief system is preventing us to realize what is happening. And there are many other coffins that are found that are beyond our human size. The Asian Atlanteans, unfortunately, like the Asian Egyptians, they exercise completely different type of life. There was no compassion at all. Exactly the same. The secret societies like the Freemasons and other Illuminati and other structures out there, they're trying to push, the new model of life, the brutality, the baptism, the school, the zoo, and the Olympics, martial arts, agriculture, you name it. Even from the simple things, just from where to go to put the watches, the bags and similar things, Even the cultures that are even recent, so to speak, that religious people, no offense, this is just my personal understanding, it's just copy-paste from the Asian Egyptian culture and before even from Atlantis. Anyway, those beings that came, they were like a royalty, if you will. They had elongated skulls, as I mentioned. They were very, very intelligent and very huge intellectual capacity. They had the ability to use the force, but unfortunately they were merciless, if you will. On the middle class of this society, there were genetic mix between the cultures, between the humanoids and the animals and so on and so forth, the reptoid forms, and you name it. And even they know exactly about the science of the ka, how they're actually referring, the soul, how it travels without losing the memory from one incarnation to another, which is deliberately put nowadays, so you don't remember exactly what you were in the past life and so on and so forth. So before the catalysm actually struck, the Atlantis was the region of Atlantis was different. More or less, this was the area from what I was shown, where the Atlantis colony was concentrated, and the capital city was the blue eye of the Sahara, if you will, which is completely destroyed nowadays. There are certain references from the Greek, historians, especially Herodotus. He mentions the Atlantis, region 450 BC and similar things, And again, Plato, on the other hand, is giving some information like for the alternative zones or the sea and land, and that kind of stuff, how big it was, and so on and so forth. So today, Mauritania practically was part of the Atlantic in those days, and obviously destroyed by the huge tsunamis and the Great Flood. So in my understanding, 12,000 years ago, the land in today's Mauritania was 300 meters lower, and the entire area was underwater, if you will, and that shows exactly when you start to see around the region, you can see even remains of the whales in the western desert in Egypt. Anyway, to continue, as those visitors started to progress more and more, started to put more influence, if you will, to the Asians, eventually it exploded around 11,600 years ago. And this was an interplanetary scale conflict, if you will, where things were almost demolished to the zero, if you will. And there are many craters around the world that doesn't have any evidence of meteorite strike or asteroid strike. They're just simply either nuclear detonation or plasma bomb discharges, are huge melted areas, if you will. So from what the extraterrestrials have shown me, they were utilizing many weapons, but one of the weapons that were frequently used were those so-called stone bows. In other words, they were using electrical, energy to combine those stone balls into ones, and through just creating 2-3 pairs or even more, they were ionizing the air in such a degree that they were creating a plasma, and then remotely it was sent to the enemy sites, if you will, and then discharged, which created a huge melting effect. And as I was studying what they were saying, practically some of the material that is found around the world with these stone balls, some conduct electricity and some are insulated. They don't actually provide the passage of the electricity, which again creates a perfect conditions for the so-called capacitor, something which can store electrical energy, and by using electrical currents and magnetic fields, they can literally discharge, wherever they want. There were two major water disturbances. One was the so-called global flood, which occurred around 11,600 years ago, which brought a lot of water and a lot of mud. Whenever those base stations that were controlling those balls, stone balls, were interrupted, they were literally falling like rain, and they were found completely everywhere around the world, if you will. Even in this case in Chechnya, so to speak, as this stone ball was extremely heated, when it actually fell down, it melted the rocks, and just when it cooled down, it stayed like that. So it's obviously showing the advanced technology that those Asians were using. But the problem is people don't understand what they're looking, and the influence of the mainstream science and the religion is doing its part, if you will. Not to mention the yellow glass evidence, which is clearly indication of the usage of the nuclear weapons, if you will, in the ancient times, very similar like the yellow glass, which is found near today's nuclear test sites. And not to mention the vitrified layers, which again shows the same destruction, if you will. So in many cases, those ancient sites were destroyed previously with a military intervention, but when the global flood actually kicked, it wiped out everything. In other words, the interplanetary conflict for dominance in the solar system that occurred 11,600 years ago was fought on different levels. It was fought between various domestic humanoid cultures and various type 2 civilization extraterrestrial groups or cultures or species. But it was all well orchestrated by the type 3 extraterrestrial civilization that was very, very evil and had a different agenda and plan for the solar system, not just for the planet Earth. So the entire conflict almost 12,000 years ago ended very brutally, if you will. A type 3 civilization brought a very, very huge gigantic craft, something similar to this, that with just one beam of light, if you will, destroyed the planet that once was orbiting between Mars and Jupiter. So that's the asteroid belt that we are seeing nowadays that practically orbited, around 2.8 astronomical units from the sun. So when this impact was actually done, the gravitational pull from the sun weakened for a short interval of time, which caused a geological pole shift on planet Earth, not just one, probably 3 or 4 times until the gravity was re-established again. The legends from the ancient Eskimos, if you will, they're also speaking about when the earth and sky, changed places a couple of times. They're referring exactly from what I was shown. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that due to gravitational imbalance, the planet became chaotic. The water in oceans flipped over, which resulted with over a few kilometers tsunamis with a force to destroy everything on its path. And like in Yonaguni Monument, south of Japan, of Okinawa, we can see exactly the same. The professor Masaki Kimura was talking about this, that he also gave the same reference, but unfortunately due to the Freemason, influence of the mainstream archaeology, it was pushed back, And obviously we are seeing artificial structure, a straight line, stairs and similar things, straight angles. In other words, as mentioned, because of the unbalanced planetary forces, the continental plates on the either side of the planet started to experience extreme pressure. They were torn apart and created gaps in the Earth crust. So in other words, the mid-Atlantic ridge, which according to the mainstream academia occurred not before but 200 million years ago, actually occurred 11,600 years ago. And exactly where the Atlantis region, as far as I was shown, was placed at the time. In other words, the geologic faults in the lower Ugab Valley in Namibia, this is done more than 20 per Richter scale. We have seen what 9 per Richter scale can do in Japan, but this is completely something unprecedented. This is the only powerful thing to destroy the Asian civilization. You can imagine how this was shaking. And also the Palpa region in Nazca Desert displays mountain formations that are ignored from the general archaeology. For example, you can see a path, and then all of a sudden the continuation of the path is, almost half a K, on a side. In other words, for Atlantis, it was all over in a less of a day. And the Atlanteans that survived the Great Flood, they become occupied by the dark type 2 extraterrestrials, and they become their new rulers. So I do apologize. I will just quickly jump to a PDF which will show me and give me a bit more flexibility to move faster than this. While we are on the speed, I will just take a short break. Sorry about that. 75 minutes is not a long time anyway. So the Greek lawmaker and poet Solon also recorded information, by visiting the Egypt around 2,600 years ago, and he was also explained that event actually that led towards the destruction of Atlantis appeared 9,000 years earlier, which again gives the same reference that I was given about 11,600. And also the Plato, the information that was given to him through 6th generation, again also speak about the same stuff. And in July 2000, the so-called lost city of Cuba, it's something remarkable, because what we are talking here is 3.1 square kilometer expanse of ancient stone structures of the vast underwater city, and not just shallow waters, but we are talking about 600 to 700 meters deep. This is just amazing, how deep this thing is. And comparing to Yonaguni, which is a lot more shallow, this is a lot deeper flooding, if you will, And the geology of Earth practically shows some evidence where the water was moving, right? And sometimes people ask, how come if this was so powerful earthquake, how much if this is so big tsunamis? We have seen what let's say 40 meters tsunami can do in Fukushima in Japan. It just practically destroyed everything on its path. Imagine if it's a 2, 3, 5 kilometers big tsunami, what force does it have? So they always ask me how come then the pyramids survived, especially on the Nile River. It's very easy, because when the mid-Atlantic practically happened due to the geological pole shift that was the result of the destruction of the planet that I mentioned before, literally the tsunamis went on and off, practically the water flipped over. And that the more water comes in certain area, the more pressure to the tectonic plate. And practically in this region, where even previously it was destroyed by the yellow glass in a nuclear blast, It actually went 133 meters below the sea level. While here in the Gulf of Aqaba, if you will, its opposite is 2,629 meters above the sea level. In other words, the entire area tilted. So as you can see here, the area which was tilted is practically where they were surviving, and there are also findings about the ancient Egyptian city about 6.5 km of the coast of Alexandria, which also shows, you know, the significant ancient Egyptian culture. On the solar system scale, as soon as this planet exploded, Mars was heavily devastated. You know, this is huge mark that was left from a huge asteroid when this planet was destroyed. And the water which was also engineered in the ancient Lemurian times was evaporated, unfortunately. There was so much dust from what they have shown me that literally the dust blocked the sun from passing through, and which resulted with the dropping of the temperatures. In other words, for a while there was like a short ice age in the rocky planets of the solar system, which are far closer to the sun, if you will, right? So after the terrible war, you know, using technologies that are beyond our current technological reach, the ETs and the domestic species, they cleared the radiation, you know, and the debris to some degree. But this time the extraterrestrials were in charge, especially a few renegade groups from the Orion constellation, if you will, were controlling the things. And that's where, in my understanding, from what I was told, the moon was brought close to the planet Earth, and the so-called Saturn moon matrix was established. So the culture, something which I will explain in the last part of the presentation. So the cultures that survived the devastation practically rebuilt a new world based on the principles of the old one, if you will, and different cultures continued to coexist for another 7,600 years. And this is roughly, you know, what was happening. I just don't have much time to go with this in detail. But regarding to the ancient Lemurians, for example, Tibet Plateau and similar things, you can clearly see that even nowadays we have 787 lakes which are there, and many of those lakes are salt water. What the salt water is doing so deep inland, if you know what I mean, you know. So practically this is all that is left. And both the Buddhist and the Hindu religions separately speak about Agartha, and the Ramayana describes Rama as an emissary from Agartha who arrived in Vimana, if you will, you know. So they rebuilt the Asian world, and they were not primitive at all, as the mainstream academia is telling us. And among many other technologies, they were using electricity, electrochemistry, electromagnetic technology, nanotechnology, anti-gravity, genetics, astronomy, you name it, you know, etc. Obviously, we are seeing a precise engineering, you know. And when you see a picture like this from Baalbek, from Lebanon, you can see that definitely we are not dealing with a primitive culture. Just to move almost similar size of the block, you know, just 10 meters or 5 meters from one side to another, we need at least 10 to 12 cranes, just originally, you know, synchronized in full capacity to move it, you know, just 5 meters. And to cut just one straight, you know, line into those heavy rocks, we need a heavy machinery, and even to transport just third of the weight, you know, we were having struggles. So how was this practically erected, put it all together, you know, in such a way that not even a piece of paper can go through? It's just simply mind-boggling, and this is not done by a primitive race that didn't have the technology. And this is a good one from Brazil. Take a look at this. All these like a heavy stones were put one on top of each other like a wooden baskets, if you will. So it's just impossible even to do for us today. It's very, very, very difficult task and job, you know. And obviously the metallurgy, the ancient Egyptologists, they are just debunking the entire, you know, information which streams into opposite direction from their religious beliefs, you know, and similar things. And obviously there were drills that were found and then confiscated by the Smithsonian Institute, the same as the huge skeletons and similar things, which are not talking about even 3D printing. You can see the precise measurements. I'm saying precise, it means literally precise. How is this created with a hand? It's impossible. You know, this is a simply 3D printing. Despite all the magnificence, the dark forces, as I mentioned, were at play, you know, and those pyramids were not tombs at all, you know. And just the Great Pyramid in Pisa, it has an estimated total mass of 6.5 million tons, and some are even 80 tons. So it's all put together in such a way, precision, that this is not done by a primitive culture at all. The main was water. In other words, the water was going through those shafts. using chemical reactions, it was literally heated to evaporation, and then using further, heating of the gas, they were producing plasma, and through something that was stolen from the king's chamber, if you will, it was just releasing certain types of energy which they were utilizing for their culture. And what we are talking about is it's plasma energy, literally delivering from or generating from the water, if you will. So one of the reasons for the superconductive materials used to create the Giza pyramids, pyramid complex, was generation of plasma energy, which was further transmitted wirelessly through either the antennas that we call obelisks, or just straight through, depending on the golden cap on the top of it. But whoever wants to see more about this in far more detail is in my other online presentation, The Big Picture Evolution of Human Consciousness. But what I'm trying to say, those were not tombs at all. They were power plants, and the producing a ball lightning type effect by discharging a high voltage capacitor in a tank of water is clearly shown. You can see here, the switches, which are different. You can see a different creature which is not human, and also the giant is literally pulling a plug, if you will. And this is quite interesting thing. You see that the depicted tools are clearly, found on near the Red Sea. So it's all there. In other words, the collected energy was further stored in the so-called plasma containers. Today we use the batteries, as a backup. And these were huge, massive. Just to give you just small sense, how things are going, this plasma container is around 100 tons. That equals 8 school buses on top of each other. That's how heavy this thing is. How was this thing put into this small chamber, into this small room with 1.5 meters distance is just out of question, And obviously what we are seeing is a magnificent engineering, understanding of architecture, if you will, and electrical systems. Water reservoirs were used, aquifers were used to produce energy, but despite all the magnificence, if you will, they were literally destroyed. Regarding to the area which was further away from the influence of the Atlantis, if you will, it was literally a colony of the extraterrestrials, and this colony was literally the worst that ever existed on planet Earth, from what I was shown. The pyramids were used and utilized in a similar fashion like in ancient Egyptian culture that we are seeing, and the hybridization actually started progressively from there, if you will. And some of those creatures that were discovered in Nazca in Peru, not long ago, is the creatures with 3 arms, with 3 fingers, 3 toes, and different rib number and so on so forth are clearly connected. The entire phenomena of the skull trepanation is not clearly explained by the mainstream archaeology. They were saying that those Asians were literally drilling holes into the skulls of the Asians for performing a brain surgeries. This is absolutely nonsense. From what I was shown is that literally they were drilling the holes into the skull, fusing the brain to the artificial intelligence that was controlled by the extraterrestrials. The devices that this brain was hooked, if you will, what the Elon Musk tries to do now with the connection of the human brain with the artificial intelligence is just a small, pieces of the technology those Asians had. Practically through the connection, they were able to utilize certain nanotechnology devices to change. Some are even for the military purposes, some for the other stuff. And I have read, like I said, all the books about Zachariah Sitchin, Hancock, and their theories. Some is good, some is completely, in my personal understanding, incorrect. So another thing which is important, which was found near the Veracruz, Mexico, is that in the jungles, especially in one cave, they found artifacts which are clearly showing the UFOs that we are having nowadays, and it's clearly showing the discovered skulls. And if you see this light on the left, it's clearly showing us that they were utilizing telepathic and telekinetic powers, if you will, and other means to create those stone bows, if you will, and then destroy the Asian cultures. Not to mention the sacrifices, the suffering, kneeling before the alien, and that kind of stuff. The Palenka cosmonaut, and it's evidence, it's all over the planet Earth, if you will. For example, the Pyramid of the Sun, they don't allow you to see what is underground. They only allow you to see the surface, but underground there are also studies which are showing there are similar, very strange channels, very similar like in the Egyptian pyramids. Obviously they were using the same technology. So 4,000 years ago, the extraterrestrials which were involved, and wanted completely different scenario for the solar system, they finished the job, if you will. In other words, Mahabharata, Ramayana speak about this. This was like a more local event on planet Earth. And using those plasma bombs, if you will, they literally melted almost everything. That's why we are seeing, the upside down stairs. This was levitated in air and then flopped down. Vitrified layers, in Peru, as you can see. This one is from the Lion Rock in Sri Lanka, clearly showing, a huge impact. And even where the blast was here, it moved the entire structure to the side. And this is where things become even more interesting. The artificial bridge between India and Sri Lanka, the so-called Sri Rama bridge, it's quite amazing because the rocks on the top of the sand actually predate the sand. One scientific study revealed that the rocks are 7,000 years old, but they're sitting on the top of the sand that it's only 4,000 years old. How that works? Also, the interesting part, from the Chinese culture, it says that 4,000 years ago there was a huge flood. Even the ancient Sumer and Babylon, they're talking about, the legends of the flood, and the last oldest written copy of the Epic of the Gilgamesh refers to 4,000 years ago. And even look at this, National Geographic, they're saying that the ancient Egyptian culture disappeared and vanished because of a mega drought that appeared nothing else but 4,000 years ago. On the other hand, Fox News are saying that the Indian, culture in India and the region during to climate change this time, which happened around 4,000 years ago, it disappeared. Anyway, I can go on and on for hours, if you will. Anyway, the 4,000 years event practically ended again with a lot of mud when those tsunamis went through, and that's when those were discovered, if you will. They were either lost in the jungles, or in very big. So those are not unfinished pyramids like mainstream archaeology and the Egyptologists are saying. Those are destroyed pyramids, And like I said, many things appeared. So a bit of a text which backs up, what was said before. But important thing is that the Mohenjo-Daro, which was one of those 7 holy rishi cities described in Mahabharata and Ramayana and so on and so forth, are among the most radioactive skeletons, discovered in the world. Practically, they were fused in the grounds, and they were holding their hands down. They were seeing what is happening, and the evidence is all around us. All the thing that was left from the ancient world was, temples or stones scattered everywhere in the jungles, and similar things. In other words, to conclude this part, the extermination of the ancient humanists by the negative extraterrestrials actually did the job. The planetary conditions were changed. A deliberate genetic downgrade of the genetic functionality of the ancient humanoids was implemented. After the genetic mutation, the ancient humanoids became us, the modern humans. If you start searching on Google or whatever for an estimated population, 4,000 years ago, they are estimating that it was only 27 million, which is 2.7% of 1 billion. Do you understand? It was completely almost a genocide, if you will, the complete wiping out. And by using technologies and weapons, they literally caused a genetic mutation from a quadruple or triple DNA, if you will. We actually ended up with double helix DNA with 5 senses and limited abilities of the consciousness. We have absolutely no memory of your past incarnations, at least most of us, if you will, and the evidence is out there. So if you start to see all these things, you can see clearly, from the ancient times. Even the babies that are born with elongated skulls, their parents actually take them to take a surgery to shrink the skulls and similar things. Well, the real stuff, which is found, in Nazca and other places, clearly showing there is absolutely no artificial elongation of the skulls, as the National Geographic or History channel is actually convincing us. In other words, with wiping out the ancient Rama civilization, the ancient Egyptian civilization, the pre-Columbian civilization, the ancient Sumer and Babylon, and the rest of the humanoids that had lived at the time with atomic weapons, supercharged plasma bombs, and many other weapons for mass destruction, the world collapsed into the dark age, if you will. After a while, certain survivors that actually took off with Vimanas and other flying crafts or deep in the underground, they returned, but the mutation already took place. It just probably they returned after 100, 200 years, and they delivered the knowledge through Upanishads, to Vedas and other secret texts, if you will, which were telling, instructions how a person can levitate, how can do astral projection, how can actually tune in different states of consciousness and that kind of stuff. So the Tibetan lamas and some of the secret Indian yogis and gurus, if you will, have kept the knowledge for a few thousand years, for 4,000 years till the present day, very, very carefully not to be given to wrong hands. In other words, with only 5 sense input and a higher abilities of consciousness deactivated, the humankind became an easy target for many abusive ET species that stayed in the solar system ever since. Then came the real dark ages of unawareness, confusion, and brutal conflict, and we are still in it, unfortunately. The few Type 3 extraterrestrial took over, and the exploitation actually began. Some of the positives that were there, they migrated to other places. Some stayed, like part also on planet Earth, Mars, and 4 moons of Jupiter, which are also connected with the genuine crop circle phenomena, if you will. And in other words, from 4,000 years ago till the present time, the Earth lost the optimal genetic expression. What that means? That means that the atmosphere in the ancient times was a lot bigger. So why is that important at all? Because it contained a lot bigger amount of prana energy or chi energy that provide a DNA abundance. So when this, the best what the organism, can have from the RNA, DNA was lost, we practically lost our memory. We became species with amnesia. And we've forgotten our true history. Then we started running naked in the woods, with sticks and arrows, seeing the lights appearing and disappearing, if you will, playing tricks with us. I can't say evolved because we haven't evolved. We progressed to more, let's say, more aggressive stages, where religious wars were taken while in the background there were other observers, that were controlling the entire show. As we come more towards the present time, we become more aware that we are not alone during the World War I, but especially World War II. We started to call them, the Foo Fighters, the bogies, unexplained objects that are moving in maneuvers unseen before. Practically, they were everywhere. And another phenomena which started to come forward was the so-called cat mutilation, which obviously, some of the Asians, as you can see, as this Asian Egyptian, creature is giving, a birth, to this extraterrestrial creature is clearly like a meat eater. The parts of the body were literally torn out from the body, but not just torn; they were precisely cut. They were cut on the cellular level. For example, this is the shape of the cell. There was absolutely no penetration into the frontier. It was cut on the cell itself, something which even the doctors couldn't achieve in the time. So if you can see here, on this area, there is no way that the predators or the teeth of the predators can do this, if you don't understand. And not to mention the other stuff that was going on, in those days, the alien, abductions, the implants, and then it goes from generation to generations and so on and so forth. And the lights and most of the cigar-shaped UFOs actually were frequently flying in the Asian Atlantis, and they're still here. Excuse me, most of them. So the hyper-intelligent alien species are here for a very long time, but for the last 4,000 years, according to my understanding and from what I have shown, they have turned out the planet into an elaborate zoo. We are talking about alien abduction programs with absolutely no consent from the human species, alien implant programs, alien hybridization programs, mind control, plasma orb surveillance, hacking and full control of the astral plane, and blocking the intelligent energy that actually reached a contact in 2008, but it was blocked by the negative forces. So the present time human civilization, when one start to really go into what was happening thousands of years ago on planet Earth, the entire reality and the entire present looks completely different. As mentioned, my contacts start when I was very, very young, about 7 years of age, and they have literally awakened me in such a way that I'm forever grateful, and they have protected me from the other ones. And as my life went through, so to speak, go on, and to more teenage age, I started practicing different disciplines from yoga, nidra, to kundalini yoga and all kind of stuff, which eventually led to controlled out-of-the-body experiences and contacts. Just on this area, which is called, suburb Novo Lisice in Skopje, in Macedonia, in Europe, I had thousands and thousands of out-of-body experiences. Some experiences were lasting over 8 hours. But in order to achieve that, I was practicing for years, blindfold, not just to develop the second sight, but also to remain the consciousness completely separate from the physical body and develop the so-called astral vision. And the more the third eye actually opened, they started to show me through the fifth system, as I mentioned, which is a telepathic holographic transmission system, what the crop circle mean, and it was just amazing, And there is so much evidence that there is so much things going on in the crop circles, and the military is completely aware of the extraterrestrials. The dynamics of how those crop circles work, and the fight between the positive and the negatives are all described in my in my books, if you will. Sometimes even the locals report white vents or a different type of vents. They come, and people with biochemical hazards, they come and they take few samples, and sometimes with using just a simple board, they make 1, 2, or 3 punches, and after 12 hours this mark appears. So when the croppies come, they start to research the phenomena. They discover this mark, on the crop. Oh, it's a man-made. Nothing to see here. And it's practically a simple form of manipulation for most of the humanity, while they are using their infrared system, just quickly to detect where the UFO appears, where the balls of light appear, and there is a, plasma discharge or flattening of the crop in certain way, because it produces energy emanation that lasts about 6 weeks or more. They also explained to me that there is a way, that we can utilize our own energy, our chi energy, if you will, to extend the auric field, reshape it into 19 spheres into the flower of life, so to speak, and then activate the field by creating a point of singularity, where individual consciousness can penetrate into the source consciousness and literally download the data. So that led to my publishing of the Awakening Key to Extraterrestrial Messages, where I have decoded more than 300 crop circles, and the entire method has been clearly excuse me, shown in many directions. There's so many things that were going on with the crop circles. The more I was going out of the body, the more interesting it became, and the more bizarre it came in the same time. I found that there is like a 40 kilometers, dark energy band, if you will, or layer that you can't cross through with the normal default astral body. Every time when I was reaching that height, I was just kicking like an invisible wall, and I was waking up, or eventually just 15, 20 centimeters above the body, and then slightly, slowly sinking. Eventually, the extraterrestrial showed me a different way through a sleeping paralysis. Once when I entered the sleeping paralysis, how to activate the energy and emotional frequency differently, and to depart the physical body with a different carrier, which is far more efficient, more energetic, and less dense than the default astral body, which eventually led to my penetration through that barrier and seeing exactly what is happening. And when I started to see, I realized that everything that we've been told on television and our belief system is completely wrong. The solar system is practically teeming with extraterrestrial life. And many of those, not many, probably 99%, they're far more beyond whatever we can actually understand. I met the positive ones. I have downloaded a lot of information. They have taught me so much, if you will, and they have protected me. And I'm very, very grateful for all these years. But I also noticed that there is practically a deception. In other words, UFOs on the astral plane, they were obviously visible. If they were in proximity of the balcony of my terrace in Skopje, in Macedonia, in Europe, I literally returned back to my physical body, jumped out of the bed, went to the balcony, and when there was a UFO on the astral plane, I saw like a hose, and things got even more bizarre, because with the default astral body, I couldn't see the cloaked UFOs. I couldn't see the alien abductions. I couldn't see alien beings, neither orbs to some degree. But when I started exiting with a more sufficient, immaterial carrier, if you will, or host, I started to notice that there are so many things going on every day in every city. In other words, beings are coming, doing stuff which are terrifying. And I started to observe, how those crafts are going, in which formation, how they behave. I started to learn. Practically, it was a long curve for me, and they took me to eventually to alien implants, alien abductions, white flashes, missing time, strange marks, and you name it. In other words, the alien implants. So the research have shown that many nanotechnological alien implants are not broadcasting in this electromagnetic spectrum at all, but they're using the so-called scalar wave technology. Therefore, when we use the technological devices and picking up a radio wave, we are practically reading a harmonic. Some of these nanotechnological devices are so small that scanning electron microscopy, show it that the nerve cells grow into the membrane, something which I will show in a second, which forms the interface between the nervous system of the abductee and the electronics of the alien implant. How advanced is that? Depending on which culture what species is doing, the alien implants can be defined as metallic, non-metallic, or biological. If we are talking biological, usually it can move under the skin, but if it's metallic, usually it's put, it doesn't move much, but often it's created from the meteoric iron, and also a combination, sometimes even over 30 elements, which are precisely chosen for a certain specific purpose. So for the detection, the ultraviolet light sometimes can help. It can find those marks from the alien creatures, if you will. The stud finder for eventually metal detection, if there is a metal alien implant inside, or eventually, a Gauss meter for eventual magnetic field. When the alien implant doesn't transmit or receive information, the magnetic field is very low or eventually doesn't exist. But as soon as it's activated, it's reachable with an instrument. Obviously, we are seeing a huge advance, how should I put it, technology. So the alien implants are practically sophisticated nanotechnological devices giving off a magnetic field and emitting what we perceived as radio signals before they're removed. Sometimes, even when they were removed and put into the plasma, they fold apart in a couple of pieces. And then when the extraterrestrials started transmitting information, that reassembled all together into one piece, So we are talking about a very, very sophisticated stuff here. So on this image on the left, you can see the capsule. So the alien implant is practically put inside a capsule, which fuses with the nervous system and the tissue of the body. So which means the body doesn't recognize the object as a foraging object, doesn't produce infection. And once when it's removed, you can see that it's going to be single wall, double wall, triple wall, nanocarbon tube, which is connected exactly with the nerves. In other words, through the alien implant, everything that you say, everything that you see, everything that you hear, everything that you think, experience or whatever, they can see it like a remote camera, if you will, the full control of our experience. And they can implant thoughts, they can give you whatever they want. Practically, that's the manipulation from the highest scale. Those frequencies which are shown on the left image are some of the frequencies that were measured from the alien implants that were taken out, and this is just a small number of frequencies. The alien hybridization program usually starts from very early age, if you will, especially in Italy. The famous Giovanna Poda case, she was practically more than 18 times impregnated by the extraterrestrials, and even on private television she gave a birth, or actually it was an abortion, where this reptoid excuse me, creature was literally taken out of her. With her mobile phone, she did like a snapshots, and obviously there were marks all over the place. She went to Japan, where the alien implants that were put in her were analyzed, and also with the powder, and it turned out that it's silk substance with a mica base, and it's highly magnetic, not natural at all. This is one of the photos that supposedly she took. It's quite astonishing, if you will. And the following testimonies are from 2011. I will not bother you much because it's disturbing, but I will just say this: I was pregnant with twins, and one just disappeared. Very weird. I saw the baby at 7 weeks and with the heartbeat. Then at 9 weeks there was nothing. In other words, 30% of the 8 million, pregnancies, if you will, that often end up in miscarriages. So we're talking about 11 million miscarriages, more or less, in our average per year worldwide, and most of them, a female gets impregnated without absolutely no reason, and then before 20 weeks, the fetus is gone. Just give me a moment, please. So the shadow government is definitely aware of what is happening. And the NSA especially deals with the subject of the alien matter, if you will. The extraterrestrials are, showing us through the back-engineered alien technology, if you will, how to make even more technology. But unfortunately, the people that are dealing with these programs are highly evil, so to speak. In other words, it's even more disturbing that there were certain reports of the entire army echelons, if you will, a group of like 200 soldiers were, abducted in the same time and implanted with nanotechnological devices. There are many secret programs, which contain remote viewing and astral spying, that kind of stuff, but also with the direct communication with the extraterrestrials. With those of some of the secret programs, if you will, the retired U.S. Staff Sergeant, Dan Sherman, is quite interesting. He spent 12 years in the service of the U.S. Air Force, but 3 years with the National Security Agency as an intuitive communicator, which stands for the ability to communicate with extraterrestrials through the intuitive manipulation of the consciousness, as a part of the so-called Project Preserve Destiny, which is a project with the goal of genetically manipulating human offspring so they would have the ability to communicate with alien species. When he started receiving communications like, for example, potential for recall, residual pain, nerve response curve, body normalization, he started to freak out because he understood that the US government, as any other government in the world, because it's ruled by the Freemasons and secret societies, rich billionaires which are now hiding through the Global Economic Forum, if you will. They're literally producing technology for their selfish purposes. And he understood that the general public has been lied and deceived, and these things are happening. They know exactly the coordinates, the time, the type of the craft, is it a red ball of light or a black disc or whatever, they exactly know the issue. So whoever wants to know more about this, he or she can find on my book, Alien Implant, And they're using artificial intelligence as soon as it appears. So the non-magnetic, marks are staying for a longer time. It's interesting that the dye visible under the light, UV light, exposure can be yellow, green, orange, or blue, depending of what they're trying to achieve. And even the cattle mutilation was glowing in the dark and ultraviolet. They were marking the cattle before they were actually taking them. Sometimes the implant can send the information directly to the moon, or eventually through a medium, through those UFO crafts, if you will, from the 4 planets in the solar system that have rings. Saturn radius about 2.5 times, more energy than actually it receives from the sun. And this is something that you guys can actually see more in the books, but it practically uses the moon as a amplifier of the signal. In other words, the signal comes from the rings of Saturn, and then it's sent to everywhere. But when the signal reaches the moon, especially the dark side of the moon, there are towers which are receiving this signal. They're amplifying the signal, and something which is called the lunar wave, if you will, goes on the surface and it affects the astral plane of the planet Earth. So we'll just quickly show you some stuff here regarding to the Saturn system. You can see those like a cigar-shaped objects, which are also V-shaped objects, if you will, which are also seen on planet Earth. Texadulus, which is a heavy hotspot from the UFO activities, different frames. The last 3 frames from the Phobos, 2 before it was destroyed, something is lurking. And this picture from 1996, it's a space, from the telescope, from the Hubble Space Telescope on infrared, is clearly showing objects, which are moving below the rings, And some of those objects are practically 50,000 kilometers long and 3.8 kilometers wide. So what chances are we standing technologically against this intelligence, if you will? The credit for the research goes to Dr. Norman Bergman, if you will, who had the guts to stand to the NASA, if you will, to show them, no, those are not those are artificial and intelligently control electromagnetic vehicles. And pretty much they've been found everywhere, you know. So Saturn is practically a super advanced machine that is engineered by advanced extraterrestrial intelligence and has a multi-purpose, one being capacity of transmitting gigantic and very complex energy transmissions of holographic nature on very, very long distances. Phoebe, as described in my book, you know, the Saturn, and is completely involved into this stuff. In other words, whoever wants to know more, he or she can check on Someone Else is on the Moon. The other book of mine, Saturn, The Secrets of the Extraterrestrial Engineers and Alien Presence, confirmed we are not in control. In other words, the astral plane of planet Earth has been hacked by extraterrestrial hackers. There is a super advanced extraterrestrial software program that runs inside the Earth astral plane. It's powered by the Saturn Moon matrix. In other words, the more I was astral traveling, the more I understood that this is not a fairy tale. They are using a plasma technology not just for surveillance, for so many other things. Sometimes the object comes, releases this, what people call as rot, if you will, and it starts snooping in people's home. If you have seen this during my astral travels, the same that we are using with drones, they're using those, those stuff to surveil. And like we use the Internet of Things, they're using plasma. They can literally just utilize all the energy, that they have at disposal. They can control our thoughts, implanted thoughts, even from the memory, or just the reading from the subconscious. They can create faces on orbs, which other researchers believe it's spiritual beings, but I can't actually speak for anyone else. The little babies till 18 months, they have the sixth sense, which is still active. They can detect those orb and plasma activity, and once when this is actually done, the energy is absorbed, unfortunately, is collected to these plasma sheets, and then it was absorbed by the extraterrestrial vehicles, which unfortunately mostly originate around the Saturn system. And the entire dreaming programs are 90% plus manufactured and produced by the plasma orbs, if you will, with either direct projection to the astral body, if the astral body is here and the orb is there, or eventually the orb can levitate above the body and through the connection, in the same way as, for example, when a person experienced a near-death experience, starts flying into a dark tunnel where the light at the end, but can hear the doctors come back, and so on and so forth. So through the same DNA, immaterial DNA connection can literally produce holographic visuals. So that's also very explained in my books, and how they are actually sucking the energy. And there's so much stuff, which is going on, and that someone can see. So identification of the UFOs is almost impossible because they're all using plasma energy and the word. And there are certain things, commonly observed UFO propulsion systems, which are plasma pitch system and the dense plasma focus, if you will, which again can be found in far more detail in my books, and we can see practically how it works. For example, if it's a cigar shape, it literally releases, the plasma at the back, and then it just pushes on the other side. And it's clearly documented, and most of the energy comes from the discharges from the lightnings, if you will. Just the plasma temperature in lightning can approach 28,000, degrees Celsius, and it's clearly showing that they're utilizing these planets in the solar system like a gigantic petrol stations, if you will, And the sun is practically a general, how should I put it, space station, where you can enter that cosmic metro system. So just to conclude the entire stuff, I was seeing practically everything what is happening. They were even tampering with our nuclear heads. The shadow governments know exactly what is happening, and it's just quite magnificent. Sometimes they even try to shoot them down, and hopefully they can recover some energy that or some technology that can be useful. And all those creatures from the ancient Lemurian times and ancient Atlantis times are still here. They have never left the solar system, so we haven't been visited during the Roosevelt incident. Let that be clear to every one of us. These creatures has been here for thousands of years, and they're not going to go away unless we change our genetics. So the only way out of this is evolution of consciousness. In other words, the new offspring, the new kids that are being born, some of them are very special. They already started to be born with triple DNA and the higher abilities of consciousness. They are far more intelligent than us, far more able to understand. And we have to give them time, because now those dark forces that are behind the Freemasons, the deep state, the Global Economic Forum, they want to literally hook us with the artificial intelligence. It's not about control or surveillance. They practically want to control us and assimilate us completely. And unfortunately, there's 2030 agenda, which someone can look it up online. And the main danger why I actually decided to step forward again for a while, because I planned to retire, is the vaccines. The vaccines will contain hydrogel. The hydrogel, as you will see in the months that will come, will contain nanotechnology. This nanotechnology will directly change your RNA, DNA. Why is that important? Not just changing of the behavior, but the little ones, those divine souls that will come reincarnating and hopefully take all this further and free us, if you will, they will not be able to do the job, because they will terminate the compatibility of the host. So that's why we need to step up and unite and hopefully prevent this from happening. So I hope I gave you enough information to to dig around, so to speak, you know. And I will just conclude on this. Look, son, it's simple. Your true essence is light. Light cannot be damaged, altered, or changed. It can change direction, yes, but it will always be light. Matter, solid things, density, darkness, those things can be dented, altered, damaged, changed. In other words, your temporary illusion in this body can appear to be forever wounded. However, your truth, your light is eternally perfect. And I honor that place in you where the universe resides, and when I'm in that place in me and you are in that place in you, we are one. And on that note, thank you very much for your attention. Well appreciated. Thanks, Anthony. Cheers, mate.